Hello everyone, it's Jamal Thomas. Welcome to the Progressive Soapbox. So hope everyone is doing decent today. It's 10:46 on a Thursday. I like giving the time for some reason. I think what it is, I like to have a demarcation point in time. If nothing else, I existed on this particular day and I was in this particular mood saying this particular thing about this particular person, place, or thing. It's my thing. It's what I do. So, first, before I start, I don't have any announcements in regards to views coming up for the rest of the week. I do have a person coming up next week who's amazing. But I want to give a thank you to my audience. That's first and foremost. If you guys like my videos, share my videos. If you guys talk about me nicely, thank you. You guys are immensely appreciated. If you assist through Patreon, Super Cash, all that stuff, you guys are a help to the show. Hell, if you guys send me stuff, I use so much of the stuff that people send me because as one person I don't have the capacity to know everything that takes place. So oftentimes my audience email, they're like, hey, I hope it's not strange that I'm emailing you this. No, it's not strange at all, seeing as X number of other people do it. So it's like everyone likes to think that they're somehow unique in many respects, and they're not. They're just people. People have these same and similar impulses. So guys, my point is thank you very much. You guys are appreciated. All of this talk of Russia collusion. Russia colluded with Trump. Russia colluded with Trump. Russia colluded with Trump. Trump and Russia. Trump and Russia. Trump and Russia. The Ruskies are coming. The Ruskies are coming. You know, I'm the guy who likes to look back in time and say, is there any historical context to frame what they're talking about in? A, they haven't shown collusion. And B, they haven't even shown that Russia has hacked anything. This stuff seems like nonsense to me. They've been talking about it for 2 years and haven't demonstrated anything. And what they've ended up on is Facebook and Twitter ads. And I have to be honest, that's so stupid and ridiculous. You shouldn't have even said it. Shouldn't have even said it. The United States, for those who don't know, has directly intervened into Russia's elections. Directly intervened. Not Facebook and Twitter ads. Directly intervene into giving this kind of propaganda to the people of Russia. Now, the people of Russia were pissed off in the 1990s, 1995 to be exact. Boris Yeltsin was president. Boris Yeltsin was not a guy that people particularly liked, and for good reason. If I am not mistaken, if I remember correctly, Boris Yeltsin was somewhat of a drunkard. Now, I could be wrong on this. This is my memory of it, not necessarily what I know, so take it with a grain of salt. But Boris Yeltsin was not necessarily liked by the Russian public. To get it across how unliked he was, Russia had state-owned television, meaning the president of Russia could bear down and get the state-owned television to say, you know, whistle Dixie if they wanted to. And yet, the state-owned television was attacking Boris Yeltsin. That's how much they disliked Boris Yeltsin. I'm trying to get across how heavily disliked Boris Yeltsin was. So, there is a problem. Boris Yeltsin is running against a communist opponent. Okay. The people greatly dislike Boris Yeltsin. Okay. And those people, because they dislike Boris Yeltsin so much, were actually thinking about maybe the communist is not bad. Maybe the communist is not all that bad. Now, Boris Yeltsin and his team looked for help. And they reached out to the American public. I want to introduce you to Dick Morris. So, this is Dick Morris. Dick Morris is an affable guy. Dick Morris is now, for the most part, a Republican. I would say Dick Morris was a Republican even back then when he was working with Bill and Hillary Clinton, because I would make the case that Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton were Republicans. I'm out the stick. I'm sorry. Republicans. Let's take a listen to Bill Morris. This is what Bill Morris believes, Dick Morris believes now. And I say this is what he believes now. It might have been what he believed back then. I would make the case that Dick Morris is just a classical Republican. He's not insane. He's not batshit crazy. He's affable as can be. Listen to him having a conversation with Cenk Uygur, and I'm going to give you a listen to. I'm giving you this because I want you to see who Dick Morris is and what Dick Morris espouses at the very least now. I'm also going to give you Dick Morris talking about what took place. And he has all sorts of stories. He's been in politics for the last 30, 40 years. So, Dick Morris talking to Cenk Uygur. This is only for reference of character. This is who this person is.
The whole thesis of what I'm going to talk about today if you let me, is that there is a major splits in the Democratic and the Republican parties. And that fundamentally, the Bernie Sanders wing of the Democratic Party and the Donald Trump, Ted Cruz wing, not the Bush wing, of the Republican Party have a great deal in common. And Ralph Nader, who was a good friend of my wife's, they founded Nightberg together with Don Ross, says that his last book was called Convergence, about the left and the right converging. And that's what I believe. By the way, I also worked on the Brexit campaign, and that's another example of that. But take Vote.com. Everybody talks now about the Citizens United decision and all of that, and the influence of big money and so forth and so on. But 2 points are important. The first is that ultimately, money is losing its power in politics. Donald Trump spent less than any of the major Republican candidates. Bernie Sanders outspent Hillary by 15 million in the primary. And ultimately, and I argue that Hillary's massive TV advantage over Donald, like 5-1, has not really helped her in the polling during the period.
All right, Dick Morris talking about convergence. This is what I think is taking place, and I think he's right about this. I think the divide that they're talking about, or the divide that they kind of stir up, I don't think it's as extensive as some people believe. I honestly don't. I don't think we're as divided as I think they make this seem. I think Dick Morris is right on that. Dick Morris may say other things that but I'm not going to agree with each and everything that somebody says. But in that very specific instance, regardless of his political ideologies, I agree with him on that particular point. And that's somewhat is what he's pushing at this point, that there's this kind of convergence between these aspects of the parties. Fair enough. Let's take a listen to what Dick Morris talks about from back then when he was this kind of political operative helping get Boris Yeltsin elected. I'm fascinated by this. It was fucking amazing. I love the historical context, because I don't think you can really understand what's taking place today without the historical context to know what took place back then. How do you even know what's the potential of your governmental leaders? Meaning, what have they done in the past? Because you can easily say, no, nobody would ever do that. Oh, they did that 10 years ago? Yes, they did that 10 years ago. You don't know. You don't know. At 18 years old, you're coming out of school, they've given you the bare minimum. And what they've given you is a jaded historical context that doesn't necessarily take that stuff into account. People are screaming at the top of their lungs about the Russia stuff. We've directly intervened in their elections. Like it's laughable that we're screaming about Facebook and Twitter ads. Let's take a look at Dick Morris in his affable way talk about intervening directly into Russian politics. I'm fascinated by this.
And Hillary, on Saturday, gave a speech warning Putin against interfering in the U.S. elections. And the FBI has talked about foreign interference, and Obama has warned about it. Now, this goes back to something that happened in 1996. When I worked for Clinton, Clinton called me and said, I want to get Yeltsin reelected as president of Russia against Zhirinovsky, who was the communist who was running against him. And Putin was Zhirinovsky's major backer. And it became public that Clinton would meet with me every week. We would review the polling that was being done for Yeltsin, that was being done by a colleague of mine who was sending it to me every week. And Clinton and I would go through it, and Bill would pick up the hotline and talk to Yeltsin and tell him what commercials to run, where to campaign, what positions to take. He basically became Yeltsin's political consultant. And I think that Putin resented that, hated it, felt that it was an inappropriate intervention by Bill Clinton. And I think he's determined to take his revenge out on Hillary Clinton.
That's mind-blowing. That's mind-blowing. The president of the United States is essentially working with one of the political operatives in another country, president of another country. At that point, that president of the other country, Russia, is trying to get elected. And I guess my point is, you would feel some way. Like if you were the Russian citizen, imagine for the moment, you're a Russian citizen. And as a Russian citizen, you've had this Cold War, maybe you've lived through the Soviet Union going bust. When the Soviet Union went bust, you've lost hundreds of thousands of people. I was reading this thing yesterday on, yeah, right here. Look at this. Just to add a little bit more context. 1991 to 2001. Huge fluctuation, right here. Mortality increased substantially after the economic crisis in 1998, with life expectancy falling to 58.9 years among men, 71.8 years among women by 2001. Most of these fluctuations were due to changes in mortality from vascular disease and violent deaths, mainly suicides, homicides, unintentional poisonings, and traffic accidents among young and middle-aged adults. Trends were similar in all parts of Russia. An extra 2.5 to 3 million Russian adults died in middle age in the period of 1992 to 2001 that would have been expected based on 1991 mortality. Wait a minute, I said that wrong. An extra 2.5 to 3 million Russian adults died in middle age in the period of 1992 to 2001 than would have been expected on 1991 mortality. Essentially, up to 3 million more Russians died than should have died during that period. Russian mortality was already high in 1991 and has increased further in the subsequent decade. Fluctuations in mortality seem to correlate strongly with the underlying economic and societal factors. On an individual level, alcohol consumption is strongly implicated as a basis, at least partially responsible for many of these trends. When the Soviet Union went bust, they lost 3 million more Russians. Nobody talks about this. Nobody brings this up. We were supposed to not take advantage of the fact that the Soviet Union went bust, and we absolutely took advantage that the Soviet Union went bust. We were not supposed to expand NATO, and we absolutely expanded NATO to the Russian border. Take a look at this. I don't mean to, the reason why I find the position of the West laughable in this is because the position of the left is laughable. I'm sorry, it is. I didn't mean to bring this up, but I want to show something else. We were not supposed to expand NATO. And yet, that's exactly what we did. Let's see. That's not a good map. That's not a good map. That's not a good map. Alright, here's one. It's not great, but I wasn't planning on doing this one. This is Russia. And we've expanded this up into their border. I mean, even these countries are NATO countries. Like I'm trying to get across this thing of these countries have been militarized, and these countries have been increasing the amount of arms that they've been, money that they've been spending on military, and been moving stuff to the border of Russia. Russia has responded by moving weapons and munitions to the border of the country in the same way. When Russia came out, we have these new hypersonic nuclear weapons. Why do you think they did that? They didn't do it just for shits and giggles. Why? I mean, come on. Let's be honest. What would you do if you were in that disposition where you've been invaded multiple times? Dick Morris has just said the president of the United States essentially worked his way into getting the president of the other country elected. The Soviets, or the people who were in the country, the Russians, were greatly dissatisfied seeing that millions of them were dying. They hated Boris Yeltsin. Call it what it is. The media arm, the United States was able to help Boris Yeltsin using this kind of media campaigns, polling and everything else, this kind of Americanized politics and Americanized media, in order to give a propagandized campaign to the Russian people in order to get Boris Yeltsin elected. You can make a case that says if it wasn't for the United States, Boris Yeltsin would not have been elected, meaning he was elected against the will of the Russian people. Don't tell me that that Russia put Facebook and Twitter ads, and that is somehow this kind of intervening in American politics. No, this is direct intervention into Russian politics. Fucking amazing. Let's go further. There's more detail to this. I've read the story in Time magazine, and I was blown away by the level of intervention into this. Dick Morris, in and of itself, talks about this being at the top level, meaning from the president of the United States to the president of Russia. What would the Russian people have thought if they had known? Oh, what would they have thought? And the fact that you had to keep that a secret for them got that across, that what you were doing was at the very least duplicitous. At the very least duplicitous. Those people would have said, this person is a puppet of the American government. This person cannot be trusted because this person is a puppet of the American government. And if the American government prefers this person, maybe this is not the person that we want for our interests. That's what they would have said. Meaning that the very fact that you had to keep it secret meant that you were doing something to some degree duplicitous. It's amazing. It's fascinating. And then looking back at historical context, and we're bitching about this. It's fucking ridiculous. They're talking about up this point that Yeltsin thought that he would magically get elected. But some people in his campaign had doubts, and so they reached out to Americans. Dresner had another connection that would prove useful later on. In the late 1970s and early 80s, they joined with Dick Morris to help Bill Clinton get elected as governor of Arkansas. As Clinton current political guru, Dick Morris became the middleman on a few of those occasions when Americans sought administration's help in Yeltsin's re-election drive. So while Clinton was uninvolved with Yeltsin's recruitment of American advisors, the administration knew of their existence, and although Dresner denies dealing with Morris, 3 other sources have told Time that on at least 2 occasions, the team's contact with Morris were, quote-unquote, helpful. Well, you heard Morris said it was direct level contact. Now, whether you want to say Morris is lying about president-to-president contact, either way, Morris is in the middle of this. They even own up to the fact that Dick Morris was in the middle of this. The United States was directly assisting the president of Russia to get elected and directly intervene into Russian politics in order to get Yeltsin elected. And they kept this a secret from the Russian population because they understood the Russian population would have been aghast at what was taking place. That's a flat fact. That's true. All of that's true. All of that's true. A week after Valentine's Day call from Lowell, Dresner was in Moscow. The Yeltsin campaign was at sea. 5 candidates led by Communist Zyuganov were ahead of Yeltsin in some polls. The president was favored only 6% of the electorate and was trusted as a competent leader by an even smaller proportion. In the United States, says Dresner, you'd advise a poll with those kinds of numbers to get another occupation. To preserve security, a contract was drawn between the International Industrial Bank Corp. Incorporation of San Francisco, a company Brainin managed for his Moscow parent, and Dresner Wickers. The Americans would work for 4 months beginning March 1st. They would be paid $250,000 plus all expenses and have an unlimited budget for polling, focus groups, and other research. A week later, they were working full-time, but the boss was not Soskanovitz. I'm not going to read all of this. I'm going to put the article at the bottom because it's a very long article. The American team hired 2 young men. Let's skip. The Americans managed to hide their identity for many months. In the interviewing various polling and focus group companies before hiring 3, they described themselves as representing Americans eager to sell thin-screen televisions in Russia. The story held for far longer than it ever should have, says Chomet. The Americans carried multiple entry visas identifying them as working for the administration for the president of Russian Federation, a bit of obviousness that constantly threatened to undermine all of the supposed secrecy surrounding their real work. Because they understood that if people found out, they would be held to pay. Here's the thing. The funny part is, they told Boris Yeltsin that he needed to run against communism. Now, they weren't sure about this. But they told Boris Yeltsin, look, you need to run against your communist opponent, and you need to run against it in a way of not saying that you're going to make things better, because people don't believe you're going to make things better. So you need to go against your natural instincts and do what we tell you to do. Boris Yeltsin completely ignored this, gave the speech, and they gave polling results on his speech that showed that they were absolutely right. And from that point on, they ran on this thing of this kind of anti-communistic message to go directly at the opponent himself without Boris Yeltsin really promising anything. Americanized politics in Russia. Let's keep going towards the end, because at a certain point, they're like, this is done, son. We got this. This is a slam dunk. And they were shocked by the results, because Boris Yeltsin even still only barely managed to get over the hump. They disliked him immensely. They disliked him so immensely that even bringing in Americanized politics was only barely enough to get him across the thing. But I'm trying to get this point across just because I'm put the article in the thing. I don't want to keep this overly long. It was our intervention that allowed Boris Yeltsin to win. Russia had real grievances with the people who were in power. They lost millions when the Soviet Union went belly up. This idea that Boris Yeltsin was greatly disliked, if the Soviet Union, if the people in that country greatly disliked him, they might have disliked him for a reason. That's their country. This is not them putting Facebook and Twitter ads. This is our direct intervention into their politics. Come on. How can you complain about Facebook and Twitter ads when this took place? Where's your moral standing? Where on earth is your moral standing? I'm going to put all of these in the bucket below. You guys can see it for yourself. You know, I like to give this kind of historical context, so this is me giving historical context. So, enjoy. Alright guys, I leave it at this. If you enjoy the content, please feel free to share, like, subscribe, and of course, you can always support through Patreon. Thanks guys.